Yeah, Kia ora Taro, and welcome to our weekly mobile learning seminar, webinar, whatever we want to call it. I'll hand over to Marissa and she'll introduce Paul to us. Thank you, Marissa.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Today with us is Paul Rain, joining us from Japan. He's based in Tokyo, and he's going to tell us about all the great activities that he's done around using educational technology in language learning and teaching. I know Paul since 2016 or so, and he's always been an active member of an association in Japan we're both members of, JOLT, the Japan Association for Language Teaching. And not only that, he's also been developing so many platforms and apps for language teachers and learners on his own. And his recent big project is Zengengo that I believe he's going to tell us about today. So we're all excited to listen to you and learn more about what you've been doing. And thank you for agreeing to be with us here today.
Thank you, Marissa, for that lovely introduction. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all. This is my first presentation for the ASCII-Lite group. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm based in Japan, as Marissa said. Let me just share my slides here 1 second. Sorry. Just going to go into presenter view here. Okay, here we go. Is everyone receiving my slides right now? Is that
yes.
good? Yep. Okay, that's great. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about developing web-based English learning applications, principles and practice. So the English is in brackets because I know that not all of you are language teachers, but my academic background is in teaching English, and so I'm focusing on that mainly. But I'm going to be trying to go a little bit broader than just talking about English learning. So yeah. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about me, just to introduce myself a little bit. For the past 5 or 10 years, I've been kind of trying to straddle the line between a teacher researcher and a developer entrepreneur. This is my Facebook header, and this is actually a screenshot from a Google form that I had to complete, and it asks whether I'm a teacher or a developer, and I had to choose one option. I couldn't choose both. So there's this kind of maybe this mindset that you can't be a teacher and a developer. You can be one or the other. But I think many of us who are instructional designers, for example, that distinction is not so clean cut, and we do tend to end up developing things when we're making online materials for our students. And it's just a matter of stepping further and further into that kind of technical role. In terms of my teaching work, my teaching and research, I've been based in Japan since 2006. I started teaching at university in 2008. The first place I taught was Kanagawa Institute of Technology, and then I've kind of jumped around different universities, all on a part-time basis. Here in Japan, it's known as a hijokin koshi, which means that you're a part-time lecturer, and you get paid per comma, which is a 90-minute class. So I've been jumping around and doing a part-time lecturing in English at various universities in Tokyo. In terms of my developing and entrepreneurial work, I developed quite a few different websites. The 5 main ones you can see here on the screen. It all started with Apps for EFL, which is now defunct. If you go to apps4efl.com, it will now redirect you to Zengengo, which is my current project. Apps for EFL was basically a kind of a potpourri of different applications, different kind of tools for language teachers and learners. There was like there was a vocabulary flashcard maker. There was a way to do gap fills with YouTube videos, which has now been incorporated into Zengengo. A wide range of different applications, basically. And after a few years of doing that, I figured out that I couldn't, it wasn't sustainable unless I could somehow monetize it. And so I tried different options such as Patreon, getting people to donate money, using Google Ads. None of them really worked that well. So I decided to start a company and try to actually, set up software as a service kind of business, SaaS, which eventually evolved into Zengengo. Abax LMS is an LMS I developed for a publisher here in Japan called Abax. They're very popular amongst higher education teachers and students. They develop textbooks for TOEFL and TOEIC and English communication skills, English reading, writing, speaking, listening skills, academic English. They have lots of titles in their catalog. So if you do teach English, I recommend that you check out Abax textbooks. Zengengo is my current venture, my current main venture, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, and hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate as well. It's a platform for language teachers and learners. It doesn't just cover English. Currently, we support English, French, German, and Spanish. And it's also possible to teach some other languages, but we officially support those 4. It has 10 different activity types for teaching languages, which cover all 4 skills of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And you can, as a teacher, you can go in and log in and create an activity and give it to your students and then see the results all within the space of a couple of minutes. So that the idea is that the barrier to using the platform is very, very low. That's something that I've learned over the years working with teachers, is that they don't really have the patience to figure out how to use a platform, and nobody really does. So you have to make it as intuitive as possible. LingoLab set of applications is something I've been developing with Oliver Rose, who is Australian living in Japan, and he basically had he basically comes up with a design and an idea, and then he gives it to me, and I turn it into an application. There are some real-time games there where students can compete against each other in real time. There are some kind of homework activities, and there are some things that teachers can create tests, and Oliver likes to focus on sentence level activities. So a lot of the games that you find online for teaching languages are kind of focused on the word level. Quizlet is the most famous of those games websites, but it doesn't really do very well for sentence level activities. So LingoLab is set up to help students learn sentences. Finally, vocab level test is what it says on the tin. Basically, you can log in, and as a teacher, you can create a vocabulary level test for your students, and it's multilingual, and so you can, well, it's English to different languages, so that the site is designed to test English. There's also another version for testing Spanish, but the main site is for testing English, and then students will either respond in their L1, so they'll translate English to Japanese, or they'll do the other way around, so they'll go from Japanese to English. Those 2 modes are called either productive or receptive language vocabulary skills. So those are the 5 main sites I've been involved with. 4 of them are still active. If you're interested in teaching languages or learning languages, please take a look at those websites. So now I'd like to kind of step back a little bit and go a little bit more general. Okay, so this is the latest stats on who in the world has access to the internet. So at current count, 68% of people in the world have access to the internet. That's of April 2022. So, you know, we can see that access to online resources and tools has increased massively since the internet first became popular in the early 90s and mid 90s. And that means that we can't ignore it. As educators, we can't ignore the internet, and we should make use of it. We can't ignore web-based resources, and we should make the best possible use of those. So we have to be very aware of the ways in which people are accessing web-based resources. It's not just about computers anymore, of course. Since Apple popularized smartphones in 2007 with the release of the iPhone, smartphones have become pretty much ubiquitous in developed countries and also developing countries. Then we have tablets, of course, and we have laptops, and then we have the old traditional desktop computer. And all of them offer a slightly different experience to the user and different challenges for instructional designers and developers hoping to utilize these devices to create engaging and interactive activities for their students. So this is a very important concept, again, for instructional designers and for developers, responsive web apps. Given the fact that there's such a wide range of different devices, we have to develop websites that work on every device, okay? The days of using Adobe Flash are long gone. Most of the best interactive applications online used to be developed in an application called Adobe Flash. Apple basically single-handedly killed Flash. Steve Jobs was never a big fan of Flash. He thought it was slow and buggy and memory intensive, a memory hog. So Apple iOS never supported Flash. And that basically put the nail in the coffin of Adobe Flash. And Adobe themselves sunset the application, I think, in 2020, maybe, I think it was. So if you're developing applications these days, you need to do it using HTML5 and JavaScript and other modern web technologies, and you need to make sure that they work on every device. So here's a little bit more detail on responsive web design. Here we have two different kind of philosophies of responsive web design. The first is developing primarily for desktop or laptop, so that you've got a kind of a landscape orientation of the screen. So it's wide and thin. So that's the kind of a layout that you're dealing with primarily. But then you're making sure that when somebody accesses your site on a tablet or on a smartphone, the design adapts to fit that screen. The other approach is to go mobile first, and this is quite a popular approach now. If you want to develop a website, and it's very good to adopt a framework. The framework that I usually use is one called Bootstrap. It was developed by engineers at Twitter, I think, originally. And that is a mobile-first framework, which means that it's optimized for mobile phones, but it will also expand and function correctly on bigger screens. So that's two ways that you can do web design. I think if you use platforms such as Webflow, which I've used in the past, and Wix, and also the kind of ubiquitous WordPress, they mainly follow the responsive web design kind of philosophy. So when you make the screen smaller, everything will adapt to that screen size. Okay, so moving back to kind of language teaching, technology and language teaching, there's several acronyms that are very, very common in language teaching. The most common and famous one is CALL, which is computer-assisted language learning. That's been around since probably the early 80s or late 70s. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention smartwatches. That's very important. That's a very good point, Thomas. Thanks for that. Yeah. So we even have an even smaller screen now, which is, maybe a couple of inches wide that we can fit on our wrist. I've never developed applications for smartwatches before, but I think that's a very important thing to consider as well. So CALL, computer-assisted language learning, has been around since the early 80s, late 70s, and historically it focused on desktop PCs, or before that it focused on like mainframe, where the student would be working on a terminal and there'd be a mainframe computer somewhere in the building delivering data to the terminal. These days, CALL is a little bit more inclusive. People tend to use it to include every device type, like smartphone, tablet, laptop, and desktop. But if you are focusing on a wider range of device types, you can also use the acronym TEL, which is Technology Enhanced Language Learning. And that really has been used since like the kind of early 2000s to talk about the normalization of technology in education. Is something that Stephen Bax kind of popularized. And he talked about how technology will become fully accepted in education when it becomes normalized, and we no longer kind of notice it. It's just taken as a given that it can be used to enhance or assist the learning process. I jumped over an acronym there in the middle, which is MALL, which is Mobile Assisted Language Learning, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail. Because smartphones are so ubiquitous, you can't ignore MALL, and sometimes you have to focus primarily on MALL, because that's the device that the students are going to have with them. Even if they don't bring their textbooks, even if they don't bring a pencil or paper, they will have a smartphone. And that does happen in Japan quite a lot. As students don't have a textbook, but they have a phone. And they just take a photo of their friend's textbook and use that. You know, it's not really an ideal situation, but they virtually always will have a smartphone, if nothing else. Finally, and thank you to Marasa for correcting my pronunciation on this. So this is MAVER. Okay, so we've got mixed, augmented, and virtual realities, which is a kind of new wave of technological devices. HMD, I think, is the acronym there, which is head-mounted display. And this is, as I said, a new wave of technology coming through now. I haven't really extensively experimented with this, but I'm interested in doing so. So I haven't developed applications for MAVER, but I have for Call, MALL, and TELL. Oops. So yeah, I already talked about how MALL is Mobile Assisted Language Learning. And it's very important considering the ubiquity of smartphones. This graph here shows the penetration of smartphones in Japan. This is for general population, by the way. This includes anyone from the age of 0 to 100. and by the way, there are over 60,000 100-year-olds in Japan. I'm not sure how many of them have smartphones, but as you may know, Japan is an aging population, and an aging and a shrinking population. And so there's fewer and fewer young people every year. But young people, smartphone penetration amongst young people is very, very high. I think it's probably even higher than 85%. For the students that I teach at university, between the ages of 18 and 22, I don't have data on that, but in my anecdotal experience, it tends to be close to 100%. You might get one student in 100 who doesn't have a smartphone. Okay. So this leads us on to another acronym. So this presentation is full of acronyms, which is BYOD, Bring Your Own Device. Now, there's two different ways I think you can do technology in the classroom. One is that you have institutional devices. The school owns the devices. Back in the days of CALL, like in the late 60s, early 70s, early 80s, it might have been a CALL lab, where all the students would go once a week to a CALL lab and then do their work on computers and then leave and then never use it again until the next week. You know, that's not the situation that we're living in 2022. Students have these insanely powerful computing devices in their pockets. I think the old chestnut is that the computing power of the average smartphone these days is more powerful than the computers that put the man on the moon back in the 60s. So it's kind of crazy to ignore this technology in a way. Bring your own device does have some problems associated with it. For example, students might not have very good data plans. They might not have unlimited data. They might have to pay for their data past a certain number of gigabytes per month. They might not have compatible, their phone might not be compatible with what you want to do. So if you're using Bring Your Own Device, you have to be cognizant and prepared to support a range of different OSs. So you've got iPhone and Android, and then you've got a range of different versions of the OS. So you might have somebody who's on iOS 14, another person who's on iOS 13, another person who's on iOS 15, etc. And there's little idiosyncrasies between those versions which could put a spanner in the works in terms of what you have planned to do, and that does happen sometimes. But bring your own device is the most convenient, I think, way of doing technology in the classroom. Now, you might be wondering why bother developing your own applications, your own systems? There's already plenty of really good solutions out there that you can just use. A lot of them are free as well. Here we can see a couple. I'm not sure if any of you guys recognize these logos and these names. Moodle, of course, is the preeminent LMS across higher education. Here in Japan, probably in Australia, New Zealand as well, and in the UK, Moodle has a very high penetration in higher education, and it's free. And it's almost, I tend to think of Moodle either as a religion or a cult. And I'm not trying to be insulting to Moodlers, but it comes across as a bit of a religion. And people who like Moodle, they want to do everything in a Moodle way. It's like kind of Apple fanboys versus Microsoft fanboys. They get very protective about their ecosystem. But you can do things within Moodle as well. You can install plugins and things. So Moodle is kind of extensible in that way. Canvas is another good solution, open source, free solution you can use. Although I do think the Instructure who makes Canvas also charge for the cloud-based version. And I think there's also a cloud-based version of Moodle these days. D2L, I think there's Desire to Learn. I think they also have an LMS. These other ones, I don't recognize myself that much, but they are very popular LMSs according to the rankings that I researched. Blackboard is the other one that I recognize. And of course, Google Classroom is a relatively new contender. I have used Google Classroom. Like all Google products, it's very minimalistic. It's very, very easy to use. It's quite powerful if you know how to use it well. But it's not really optimized for teaching languages. And as a language teacher, I want my LMS to be optimized for teaching and learning languages. Edmodo there is crossed out because it recently announced that they were shutting down. And I don't know if there's any Edmodo users in the room today, but people were not very happy about that. But I have mixed feelings as a developer and as a kind of a business person. The reason Edmodo is shutting down is because it wasn't sustainable economically, right? And most Edmodo users, I think maybe all of them, hundreds of millions of them, were not paying anything to use the platform. And I think Edmodo was trying to rely on advertising revenue or kind of business partnerships, and it simply wasn't sustainable economically, which is a shame. I think it was a very popular platform, but this is an important thing. People tend to expect web-based tools and platforms and resources to be free. And I blame Google and I blame Microsoft partly because Google makes amazing products that are free. But again, there's an old chestnut that says, if you're not paying for a product, then you are the product. Okay, so if you use Gmail, the Google systems scan every single email you receive for keywords, and then they deliver you advertising based on those keywords. If you use Facebook, Facebook scans all of your posts, all of your friends' posts, all of your bio data. It tries to figure out more about you so it can deliver more targeted advertising. It's all about consumption of data to make the advertising more accurate and more effective. So that's worth bearing in mind. And that if there is an app that you're using and it's priced reasonably, I think it's kind of not a duty, but it's better for you if you subscribe, because one day it might just disappear, like Edmodo did. So that's my little rant about that. So moving on, again, kind of digging down more into why bother developing your own applications? Why bother developing your own online materials? Well, here's some reasons. First of all, you don't have to completely give up your current LMS. So if you are a Moodle user or a Google Classroom user, you don't have to throw it away and use your own application. You can integrate with that LMS. That's one thing that we've been trying to do with Zengengo as well. So if you ever thought to yourself, you know, my LMS is great, but it can't do X, Y, Z. It can't do this, can't do that. Maybe you could be the one to make it do that. Or you could hire a developer and you could give them your specification, and then they could help you to develop that system. You can gain more control over the features and functionality. So again, it's all about control. It's like teachers increasingly spend our lives in front of a computer, and we're constrained by the system. And sometimes we want to break out and do things that the system won't let us do. And if you learn to program, or you hire a programmer, and I can talk more about that later, you can have more control over your teaching and learning, and hopefully make it a more effective and enjoyable experience for your learners. You can cater to idiosyncratic needs. Again, most of the major LMSs, they're kind of generic. They're like, you can teach anything on Moodle. You can teach anything on Blackboard. It's not optimized for any particular discipline. So if you're a language teacher, or if you're a STEM teacher, or if you're a math teacher, you know, it might not have the fine-grained kind of treatments and tools that you need. So you can do that yourself. You can upskill yourself. So this is a kind of a word I've been seeing a lot lately on LinkedIn and Facebook, like upskilling yourself, learning a new set of skills to stay relevant to the job market, and to learn new skills, basically. You can get a research grant. Now, I'm not sure how it works in your context, in Australia, New Zealand, etc. Here in Japan, we have a government agency which is responsible for handing out, for administering grants, and university professors can apply for grants. I imagine that Marassa will be doing this, or has done this, and you get kudos if you can get a grant. And once you have that grant, what do you do with it? You have to make something. You have to do a research project. That research project might involve developing your own application, your own kind of system. So you can pay someone like me to help you out to do that. And I've done quite a few research projects now. And it benefits everyone. So it benefits your university, it benefits you personally, it benefits the developer, and it benefits the users who are using that system that you've developed. Possibly you could strike it rich, excuse me. Possibly you could strike it rich. As a case in point, I don't know if anyone here has ever played Wordle. Wordle was this kind of word game that went viral, kind of, I think last year or maybe the year before, and it was basically you had to guess the word from certain letters, certain hints on the screen. It went viral, and it was recently sold to New York Times for a 7-figure sum. So that's a very, very rare case. That doesn't happen very often, unfortunately. But if your app does go viral, you have a chance of making some money out of it, I think. And finally, it's fun. You know, it can be very stressful to develop applications, and you do get feedback from users sometimes that is critical, or is you know, wanting to add a feature that isn't there. Which is good, but you have to balance that. We find developing Zengengo, when we change something for one user, another user might not like it. So you have to, as your app begins to grow, you have to be aware of the way that your changes will affect all users, not just the person who requested the change. I want to talk a little bit about web versus native apps here. So we all know that you can download apps from the App Store if you have an iPhone, or from Google Play if you have an Android. Interestingly, when the iPhone was first released, Steve Jobs didn't want to allow people to download applications to their phone from the App Store. The idea was that if you wanted any extra functionality that wasn't already installed on the phone, it would all come through the web. And then that decision was reversed, and Apple focused on developing the App Store. They wanted to control the revenue flow and also the user experience, and they wanted to control the content. You'll notice that certain applications get rejected from the App Store if they duplicate existing functionality on the phone. One example of that is Google Chrome. Google Chrome on the iPhone is basically Safari with a Chrome icon. Like, the underlying technology for Google Chrome on the iPhone is not the same as Google Chrome on Android. So it can't do things like speech recognition and other things that Google developed for Chrome, because Apple doesn't want to replicate functionality. They want to basically control, and they want people to use Safari, basically. Nowadays, web apps are becoming more and more powerful. Now, developing native apps is incredibly difficult. You actually have to compile the application. You have to learn a language like C or Objective-C, or these days Swift. Web apps can be done with a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And they can also be done using website makers such as WordPress and Wix and the other one I mentioned. I can't remember the name of it right now. So I develop web apps. I don't develop native apps, and I recommend other teachers who want to get into this focus on web apps and not native apps. Hiring someone to develop a native app for you is very, very expensive. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars to make a basic application. So we don't really need to develop native apps unless you're developing some kind of 3D game or something that relies very heavily on native app exclusive technologies, such as sending MMS or SMS. Here you can see you can't do that on through the web right now. You can do it with an API, but you can't do it directly with JavaScript. So here you can see that we can do a lot of things, and probably all of you have noticed this recently, like suddenly it's possible to record video directly within the web browser. Suddenly it's possible to recognize someone's voice directly within the web browser. So the functionality of web apps has really, really improved. If you go to whatcanwebdo.today, you can see all the things that it's possible to do using web apps. And so it is quite a powerful technology now, and there isn't really much that you can't do using web technologies. Anything that you can't do, so if there are certain things that you can't do, for example, sending an SMS or an MMS, for example, you can simply plug into an API. An API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's basically a third-party company that has a certain technology, and they are exposing that technology to you as a developer, and they give you a secret code, and you use that code to make a request to the API, and then you send some kind of data to them, and they send you some kind of data in return. An example would be speech recognition, where you're sending them an audio file and they're sending you back the transcript of the audio file. There are tens of thousands of APIs available these days on the web. Again, focusing on language learning, companies such as Macmillan, Oxford, Merriam-Webster all have APIs. So these companies started off making dictionaries, and then they put their dictionaries online, and then they developed APIs for their dictionaries. So I can send a request for dictionary data. I might want to give students a definition of a word like bank, and I'd send the request. I'd send the word bank, and it would return the definition to me, a place that you keep money, or it might also include the side of a river, for example, and then I can show that definition to the student. So the range of things that you can do with web applications is increased exponentially by making use of APIs. This is a little kind of illustration of the kind of the process of sending a request to your web browser and getting a response. So when you access a website such as Facebook, you do so using a web browser such as Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. You send an HTTP request using a URL, Uniform Resource Locator. The web server then will look at the URL and decide which resources, which data that you wanted for that URL, and it will send them back. On the website, you have servers such as Apache, Nginx, and Express. Those are the three most kind of common and popular servers. And you have languages such as PHP, ASP. And these days, you can actually use JavaScript on the server side. So you have a client, which is your web browser, and you have the server, which is the computer that deals with the request that you send. And in the past, it used to be that you use JavaScript in the browser and you use PHP or another language on the server. These days, you can use JavaScript on both the client and the server. So it makes it much easier and quicker to develop applications with just one language. Okay, so I went quite deeply and heavily into the tech there and into the kind of all the acronyms involved with the technology. But as teachers, we have to not only think about technology, but also theory and methodology and principles and pedagogy. So that is equally, if not more important than the technology, is the pedagogy. So for me, as a language teacher, my pedagogy comes from language teaching, which is ELT, English language teaching, or EFL, English as a foreign language, or ESL, English as a second language. So there's lots of theories surrounding and involved with those particular areas of language teaching. Now, some theories relate to teaching and learning. Some theories relate to language itself. Some theories relate to language teaching and learning. So language teaching and learning would be a subset of general teaching and learning. And some theories relate to technology-enhanced, computer-assisted language teaching and learning. So it's a subset of a subset of a subset, and you're really getting down into the niche. How do I use technology to enhance the teaching and learning of languages? And that's what my special interest is in. So just to give some kind of illustrative examples, this list is by no means exhaustive. I'm sure all of you have your own favorite pedagogical approaches, your own favorite theories of teaching and learning. Here are just 4 examples that tend to come up again and again in CALL and in TEL. Behaviorism, structuralism, interactionism, and constructivism. And I'm just going to talk briefly about these, not go into too much detail. Behaviorism is associated with the work of B.F. Skinner, who was working in the 1930s, 1940s. He developed the idea that human knowledge is basically a response to a stimulus. If he experimented a lot with dogs. So he'd ring a bell and the dog would, he'd ring a bell and he would feed the dog. And before the dog eats, it starts salivating. And then eventually, whenever he rang the bell, the dog started salivating. So it was stimulus, response, some kind of prompt and some kind of reaction, prompt and response. The way that this is done in CALL, the kind of classic example is flashcards. Okay, so obviously not just useful for language learning, it could be used for learning anything. Another way of describing this is called paired associates, and it's a very, very old technique of learning the way that one thing connects to another, a kind of a binary pairing. So for language teaching, on the red card here, you might have on the front, you might have the word dog, and on the back, you might have the word inu, which is the Japanese word for dog. And you'd have dog, inu, dog, inu, dog, inu. And eventually you would show your students the word inu and they would say dog, right? So Behaviorism connects really closely with the idea of using the computer as a tutor. So this is something I kind of jumped over earlier on. There are three main ways that computers have traditionally been used in language learning. One is using the computer as a teacher. One is treating the computer as a student. So the student is the teacher and they're teaching the computer to do something. And the third is using the computer as a tool. So for example, as we're doing now, we're communicating through Zoom. The computer isn't really doing much, but it's acting as a conduit between myself and the audience. So the computer is a tool. So a computer as a tutor, the computer as a tool, and sometimes the computer as a student or as a learner. Anyway, behaviorism treats the computer as a teacher, and it's a teacher that never gets tired. I mean, you can drill a student indefinitely for eternity. For as long as there's a power supply and an internet connection, you can drill students with a computer, with kind of flashcard and other behavioristic activities. The next theory I want to talk about is structuralism. This, again, relates specifically to languages. This is a theory of language rather than a theory of language learning. But theories of languages do influence and affect how you teach the language. So depending on your understanding of what language is, that affects the way that you want to teach it. Structuralism is associated with the work of Ferdinand de Saus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's hard to pronounce these names sometimes. And he basically said that language is a combination of smaller parts. So you can break language down into its component parts, excuse me, and then reassemble those parts. And learning how to use language is all about learning how to combine the parts correctly. So learning grammar, how do words fit together to make sentences? How do sentences fit together to make paragraphs? How do paragraphs fit together to make a coherent narrative? That's all structuralism. And in this example, you can see one of our Zengengo activities, which requires students to reconstruct a sentence that has been broken down into 4 parts and then kind of scrambled, randomized. And they have to use their linguistic knowledge to put the parts into the correct order. So that's structuralism. Another theory which is very, very common is interactionism. This is associated with the work of Lev Vygotsky. Now, I've been looking more and more into theory recently, and Vygotsky comes up time and time again. He's basically ubiquitous across all different kinds of research, not just language teaching, any kind of learning involving either adults or children. I think Vygotsky primarily worked with children, and he developed this idea that the children need a more competent adult or a more competent peer in order to get to the next stage of their ability or their skill or their knowledge. He had this acronym, another acronym, ZPD, which stands for Zone of Proximal Development, which means that where the student currently is and where they can get to from where they are. So as teachers, we have to figure out where students currently are and where they can get to with a little bit of help, not completely on their own, with a little bit of help from the teacher, where could they get to? Now, with technology, that little bit of help could come from a computer, right? So this is called scaffolding, and the computer can provide scaffolding for the learner, and it can make that the task a little bit easier and give them a little bit of help. So, interactionism is the approach that says that people learn languages by interacting with other people, with other language speakers, and we can use the computer as a tool to enable that process. Again, as I'm talking to you now through Zoom, We could have our students talking to each other on Zoom as a synchronous medium. We could have students talking to each other on a Moodle forum as an asynchronous forum, as an asynchronous medium. All of that is encouraging interaction, and the computer is being used to scaffold that process to help them to get to the next stage of their development. The final theory I want to talk about is constructivism. This is, again, associated with Vygotsky and also Piaget, Jean Piaget. The argument here is that when we learn things, we learn by creating. We learn by creating something original. So rather than getting students to simply just read English texts, they would be creating their own texts. Rather than getting students to read a blog, they would create their own blog. So we learn by making things, and more importantly, or maybe equally importantly, by sharing those creations with other people and getting feedback on those creations. So again, Moodle is very closely aligned with constructivism and social constructivism. The idea is that students go into Moodle and they make something in a forum, they create a post, or they write an essay, and then they can share that with their teacher, they can share it with their peers, and that assists the learning process more effectively than just simply being a passively receiving information. They're actively constructing new information and new knowledge. So this table summarizes different theories I've discussed here. Again, these theories go a lot deeper than I've discussed today. It's a little bit maybe deceptively simple explanation, but they go as deep as you're willing to go, basically. So we've got behaviorism key figures, B.F. Skinner. The basic idea is that human and animal behavior is based on conditioning, a kind of stimulus and response. So you show a student a word in their L1 and they respond in L2, stimulus, response. Then we have structuralism associated with Saussure, that the idea is that languages can be broken down into parts and the relationship between those parts is paramount. So learning a language is basically learning how to break it down into parts and recombine those parts into comprehensible messages. Interactionism associated with the likes of Vygotsky says that language develops out of a desire to communicate. Language ability develops out of a desire to communicate. So we have to provide students with the opportunities and the tools to communicate with each other, to communicate with the teacher. It's all about interacting. And constructivism associated with Piaget and Vygotsky, learning is an active process and people gain knowledge and understanding through experience. So the students are not just passive receptacles of knowledge, they are actively constructing something. Again, with language that might involve writing a blog or participating in a forum or recording a video and uploading it somewhere. All of that would be in line with a constructivist approach to learning. Okay, so I think I've been speaking for almost an hour. I'm not sure how much more time I have left. If I do have a bit more time, I'd like to show a demo of one of the sites I've made. If I don't have any more time, that's fine. I'm happy to take questions at this point. If you could advise me accordingly.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, we normally have it for an hour, so maybe questions, and if we do have any follow-ups, then we can get a demo. Marissa?
Yeah, sure. That sounds good.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was great. Even
Thank
for
you.
me, I mean, sharing the same discipline with you, I felt like I'm learning a lot and getting a very good review of things that I've forgotten here and there. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe
No worries.
because we get to talk to each other all the time, I want to give the chance to ask questions to other members here first. So Tom has a question in the chat. I can see he's asking. what you're
Yes,
doing.
so what are you doing next? What are you doing right now? What's the hot new thing?
Good question. Well, I'm still focusing most of my energy and efforts on Zengengo. So Zengengo evolved out of apps for EFL. I was developing Zengengo a few months before the pandemic hit, and the pandemic came, and virtually every teacher in the world had to go online. They had to use technology. They had no choice. So the naysayers and the kind of the technophobes among us, who I think are quite few anyway, but they had to use technology. And I thought, well, that's a good opportunity for me to turn this thing into some kind of business that could possibly be monetized, but also be useful to teachers. So most of my energy now is focusing on Zengengo. I'm also involved in developing some Kaken projects, projects that are paid for with government research money. So if any of you here today are recipients of a research grant and you're looking for a developer to work with, I may be available to help. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for that.
No, thank you, Paul. Sorry, I've had some trouble connecting earlier, so I couldn't say hi. But I'm really keen on seeing a demo later. I'm currently working with some developers on creating a customized app for field-based data collection that can be incorporated into a mobile learning package for students in ecology. So it's a little different from your field of interest, but definitely aligns with the sorts of things I'm interested in doing. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? What academic disciplines is everyone here involved in? I think I saw somebody was an instructional designer. I noticed that. But like what field? Like what academic discipline? Education? So is that Chris? Is that like general education, like higher education, or K-12, or what kind of education?
Most of my research is in higher education, but I'm attached to an education faculty, and my background is teacher education.
So teaching teachers how to teach.
That is a big part of it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's like the JELT motto is learning to teach, teaching to learn. Or it could be the other way around. I can't remember. It's like, yeah, we as teachers love to learn more about how to teach better, and then we pass that on to our learners, and it's kind of a virtuous circle, isn't it?
Okay.
What other kind of disciplines are people involved with? Computing. Okay, computing. Yeah. So obviously you have to use computers to teach computing. It's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Nope.
No. Okay. How do you teach computing?
One of the learnings from the pandemic was that most of the teaching wasn't oriented to use computers.
Oh,
it was
wow.
It was people talking to people in rooms, and the computers were on the side.
Ah, so they're talking about computers, but they're not using computers to talk about computers.
And we're trying to work through the implications of what we now do, because a lot of computing is a social sort of activity.
Okay, that's surprising to me. Yeah, I thought computing would be the most obvious situation to use computers, but obviously not.
Interesting. Paul, did you self-teach all these skills, or where did you learn all these development related?
Oh yes, I had a slide talking about how to learn to code, but I didn't include it in this particular presentation. Let me find that slide 1 second. It's in a different presentation. Maybe in my paper. Sorry, 1 second. Principles and practice. Yeah, this one, I think. So a lot of this stuff you can learn online. You can learn how to make websites online. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to find my list of recommended resources here.
Sure.
Here we go. Okay, let me share my screen one more time here. So yeah, these are some resources that I've used. One is called Learn Code the Hard Way, Team Treehouse, LRN, Code School, W3 Schools, and Stack Overflow. These last two, I think, are the ones I refer to the most. So if you want to figure out how to receive data from a form on the internet, how to create a form on the internet, how to, all of that stuff is like, you can Google it. And normally the result comes either from W3 Schools or Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is awesome for programmers. Like virtually every problem that you've encountered with coding, there'll be an answer on there somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've come across these two websites, especially Stack Overflow, when I was trying to learn how to use LaTeX. I think a lot of the questions that I put into the search box came out of this website. I got the answers from there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, the internet, it really has kind of supercharged coding, and there's lots of good tutorials as well on YouTube, and also Udemy. I took a couple of Udemy courses, I think on Angular and also Vue. I use a JavaScript framework called Vue, which is makes much quicker to develop applications online on the web.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing.
So nobody other than Marasta is really involved in teaching English, is that correct?
Neil is, but he's not here today,
Yeah,
unfortunately. He's in
that's
the
okay.
UK, and the time difference is makes it impossible.
What about like theories of teaching and learning, like behaviorism, structuralism, interactionism? Like, are there any kind of favorite theories, I wonder, amongst the people here today? Approaches or philosophies or theories? Oh, that sounds interesting. I wonder if Thomas could explain more about that.
Wise about learning, it comes from connectivism, and Dave Cormier. It's about democratizing learning, really, and really looking at the teacher's role, designing triggering events for students to get them thinking.
Designing triggering events. So is that kind of behavior like a kind of stimulus and response kind of thing, or not really related?
Not in a behaviorist way. More get them creating, get them involved in problem-based learning, etc. Finding solutions.
Problem-based learning. Okay.
It's on the other end of the behaviorism spectrum. So it's really acknowledging that learning is very organic, it's very unstructured, it's very non-linear. So it is really putting the students at the central sort of heart of the learning process. And what Tom is saying, the role of the teacher then is just really just triggering that learning process with whatever you can. It might be a piece of content, it might be just a provocation, a question.
An assessment design, learning activity.
I think there was a famous TED talk where the guy put like some kind of computer or maybe like an ATM or something. He just gave them this device and then left the kids to figure out how to use it themselves, basically. Would that be an example of that? I mean, that could be a trigger, right? And then they just have to figure it out themselves.
Yeah. Normally there's a little bit more guidance involved in that, but that's kind of like I think you're referring to the hole in the wall.
Yes.
Sugata Mitra, which is very sort of the informal domain, where it's like there's no formal curriculum, so it's pretty much really learning through play. So there's a new device now. It's like, oh, it's intriguing, you're quite interested, so you really driven by curiosity to find out what is it.
Yeah. Social constructionism. Okay, so that's good. So that's somebody else is interested in that collaborative online learning.
It makes me cringe because we have to write these sorts of statements as part of our professional development.
I recently did a research project looking at teachers' beliefs about theory, and we obviously tried to teach in a pedagogically principled way, but often pragmatic considerations come to the fore, like how long does it take to do? Does my university allow it? Do I have the resources to do it? Do I have the tools to do it? Those kind of pragmatic considerations often trump theory. That's what I found in my research. Yeah.
Dom and I know a colleague, but he's a good friend of ours, and he always had this one-liner where he would actually always throw it out there saying pedagogy gets in the way of teaching. And then he just based off laughing at conferences and things like that. But yeah, very, very true. I mean,
wasn't there a famous musician who said something like school? What was it about? He started learning a lot more when he quit school or something, or yeah, it's like he learned in spite of school or something like that.
Well,
Yeah.
while we've got you here, how about a bit of free consultancy? We have the issue in Australia of international students from China and elsewhere, and the issue is always their English fluency. Are there tools to help those sorts of students, as opposed to students learning it from scratch, as it were? I mean, in practice, I think this is more a confidence thing where, especially when they're doing a technical subject, their language is fine, but they're afraid to talk.
That ties into kind of willingness to communicate. We have an acronym, WTC, willingness to communicate. I think, I mean, maybe they could form some kind of conversation circle. That's one thing we do a lot here in Japan for students who have intermediate or pre-intermediate level of English, but they're not really confident. Yeah, conversation circles work quite well. I don't know if Marassa has any other ideas.
But can we use the tech in that?
The tech. Well, I mean, you could do a conversation circle online, I guess, using Zoom or Google Groups. There are also websites that allow students to practice speaking to the computer. So I mean, Zengenga will do that. For example, you can create an activity for students to say, one of my colleagues did a 30-day speaking challenge thing. I can just show you that quickly. 1 second. Zengenga.
Sure. Just as you're doing that, let me say that in my own experience as a learner of English as a second or foreign language, I think more exposure has always helped me a lot. So listening to a lot of English helps me speak better, obviously, or reading more helps me write better. So that's what has worked the best for me, no matter if it's just an analog activity or a computer, like technology aided activity.
Yeah, there's a famous linguist, Stephen Krashen, and he basically says that all productive knowledge of language comes from input. It's all about the input, you know, like he's hardcore input. he even says that speaking is not practice, you know. But his work was criticized by Meryl Swain, who was a Canadian teacher of French in an immersion situation. And she said, no, you have to speak to notice the gap between your ability and the kind of ideal grammar and pronunciation. So I think that speaking is practice. This is something one of my co-workers, one of my business partners developed. Challenge your learners to become better speakers. It's a 30-day English speaking challenge. You can import the course onto Zengengo, and then the students every day for a month, they log on and they record a response to a prompt, and then the teacher can listen to that and give feedback. So that's one way to do it using technology with Zengengo. That's what we're promoting right now. Yeah.
Great.
But then you need someone to listen to the recordings, you know. I mean, you could do it just a student, because we have actually feedback built in. So after the student submits their recording, they can see an example recording. So they get immediate feedback, automatic feedback. But I think it works better if a real human is giving them feedback.
Definitely. Okay, thank you so much, Paul. And it was great listening to you and learning a lot about all the activities that you do. We appreciate your time, and all you've done for this great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marassa, for inviting me. It's really good to speak to a different set of people, because I'm always speaking to JALT people. So it's good to
Sure,
step out of my comfort zone. And nice to meet you, Tom. Thank you very much. And yeah, guys, everyone, and Tom and Thomas. And thanks for sticking it out to the end. And I'll see you maybe again sometime.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and maybe we can
much.
collaborate. Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye, Marassa.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Oh, one question. Oh, she's gone.